Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We've developed the concept of culture and how that influences the thinking processes. We've developed the concept of worldview within its multi-concepts of the German Welt system, of Weltbild, Weltanschauung, and Weltmodel. And now we're taking those two concepts, the culture and worldview, and applying them to origins. And in this, we are in the fourth part of the series of applying those concepts to the Western cultural way of thinking, and we're building a house of thinking, a house of understanding, the house of how we look out at the world through our lenses. So this is now we're in the next phase of our building project is that we have, well, first we have the culture as the ground zero. We have as the foundation our chosen source of reliable knowledge. Then we have the four columns or basic belief system, basic beliefs that are affiliated, extrapolated out of the foundational source. And then on that we have a system of thought. And then we have three columns, which are the methods of getting there. And now we have the third floor put on top of that structure. And the third floor represents the scientific model produced. And that's what we're after, is the scientific models of origins, or the origin of scientific models. What we're doing here is that this is the third floor, and it is the scientific model produced by this structure is called a Western. Okay, that's fair, because it's from Western culture. It's got the Western groundwork, ground zero. It's natural. Yep. It's natural because we divided the natural from the supernatural. So we're in the natural domain. So it is purely natural. It is evolutionary science. Evolutionary is unfolding. And so it is a science that promotes the natural unfolding of life without any obstruction, without any interference, because it's a closed system. So life can unfold at its own rate, at its own processes, via its own processes. The third floor, being a scientific model that was produced, was Western evolutionary natural science. There was a curator in Chicago in the late 1800s that was in charge of putting together or manning the museum in Chicago on natural history. And there wasn't a lot of literature, there wasn't a lot of knowledge that was published that was out about the evolutionary theory, because Darwin had published his The Origin of Species in 1859. So this is the late 1800s, and there's still not a whole lot published on the topic. And since he was in charge of the exposition, he decided to do his own research and to document the evolutionary theory idea and where it came from. So his name was Henry Fairfield Osborne. He investigated and wrote about this scientific model and its origin. Where did it come from? Well, his investigation took him further back than what he was expecting. But I was able to get a hold of his book, not the first edition. Got a hold of about a third edition, published in 1929, I believe. And what it is he documents the early philosophers and what their thoughts were, because they changed the source. They changed the source of reliable knowledge. They said no more revelation, no more tradition, no more outside authority. It is now based on our human reason. And so where did that take them? When they were thinking now, what did they think about where they came from? What was their science? Well, this is the fascinating part, is what Henry Fairfield Osborne documented in his research. He says of Thales Miletus, who lived 640 to 546 BC, Dr. Osborne says, as far as we know, he was the first who endeavored to substitute a natural explanation of things for the old myths. He declared water to be the matter from which all things arose, and out of which they exist. The idea of the aquatic or marine origin of life, therefore, is an extremely ancient one. So Thales of Miletus, he proposed that the source of all living things is water. And he was the first to substitute a natural explanation for all the old myths. So, 600 BC, Thales says water is the source of all life. And that still holds true today. We've sent a probe to Mars. We've sent space probes out looking for water because we believe water to be the source of all life. And where did that come from? Apparently it came from Thales, 600 BC. Next, we have Anaximander from 611 BC to 547 BC. He taught that the earth first existed in a fluid state. And from its gradual drying up, all living creatures were produced, beginning with men. These aquatic men, so they weren't just men, they were aquatic men, they were in the water, first appeared in the form of fishes. So they looked like fish, or they were apparently somewhat of a fish combo. And they emerged from this element only after they had progressed so far as being able to further develop and sustain themselves on land. Okay, that's an interesting concept coming from Anaximander, who was the disciple of Thales, that it appears to be a evolutionary process, changing process, and that it progressed so that they were able to further develop, and they went from water to land. Okay, does it sound like a concept you've heard of before? Now, Anaximanes, in 588 to 524 BC, he introduced the idea of primordial terrestrial slime, a mixture of earth and water, when exposed to the sun's heat, directly produced plants, animals, and humans. Okay, so it was a spontaneous generation. It was humid slime, mixture of earth and water, and it was exposed to the sun's heat, the energy. It directly produced plants, animals, and humans. That was Anaximanes in 540, 530 BC. Okay, and I'm not sure if I'm saying these names right, so don't discount what they said by my mispronouncing their name, but I would say it's Xenophanes. In 576, 480 BC, he says the ultimate origin of life he traced back to spontaneous generation. Okay, he named it spontaneous generation, believing that the sun, in warming the earth, produces both plants and animals. Okay, so he directly focused upon the ultimate origin of life. Where did life come from? How did it originate? And being from 500 BC, you didn't have the equipment and knowledge that we have today. He says the ultimate origin of life he traced all the way back to spontaneous generation, believing the sun in warming the earth produces both plants and animals. Interesting. So now we have spontaneous generation of life. Now we have Empedocles. Well, that might be more Spanish than English, but you see the name up there. You can write it down. 495 through 435 BC. He simply modified the abiogenetic hypothesis. Abiogenetic. It must mean not, or before life hypothesis. And by happy conjecture, gave his theory a semblance of modern evolution, with 4 sparks of truth. Okay, what were those sparks? First, that the development of life was a gradual process. Second, plants evolved before animals. Third, that imperfect forms were gradually replaced, not succeeded, replaced by perfect forms. Sounds kind of like survival of the fittest. And fourth, that the natural causes of the production of perfect forms was the extinction of the imperfect form. Somehow the imperfect became extinct, probably when the more perfect showed up through the competitive nature. You get an idea here of evolutionary theory and where it might have come from? It looks like it can be traced back a long ways. In fact, Henry Fairfield Osborne, he published his book, and the title of the book, and if you want to look it up, you might be able to still find one, is From the Greeks to Darwin, published in 1894, first edition. So, it seems that the theory of evolution has been with us for a long time, and it predates Darwin by 3,000 years, or 2,500 years. So, Darwin might have added a few ideas to it, might have shaped it into a little more modern theory, but it's still a theory. It's still a theory, a way of looking at things. And when these Greek philosophers came up with their basis of reliable knowledge, their source of reliable knowledge, where are they going to get it from? They ended up elaborating a system of origins that is very similar to what many believe today in the evolutionary science. And 1859 was a big year. It was the year that Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species. So it was a year that he launched kind of his not his career, it was probably launched before then a bit, but it really launched it internationally with the publication of his book, The Origin of Species. In that same year, 1859, the French Academy of Science, now understand that the French were the originators of a lot of movements that were humanistic in nature, the Enlightenment period, and so on, where the Renaissance, where they focused on man, and that man was the focus, and that it was overthrowing a lot of the old world, the old belief system, and so they were instituting a humanism. And in 1859, the French Academy of Science decided to sponsor a science fair with the goal of proving or disproving the theory of spontaneous generation. Why would that be important? Well, because up to that point, the naturalistic origin of life was based on that life just comes out of non-life, that life just comes out of the ground, that is produced, because when you have a closed system, where can life come from? And it's obvious that it can't start with life, so life has to be produced somehow after the system has been going, but being closed, how does a closed system produce life? So this was the interest of the French Academy of Science. The winner of this competition was a chemist whose name was Louis Pasteur, who by using S-shaped flasks convinced the Academy that spontaneous generation was now scientifically disproved. Dead in the water. Spontaneous generation of life? No, it doesn't work. So then what do we do now? Well, you give Louis Pasteur his winnings, and whatever that might have included, I don't know. But published not too long later by Frederick Engels in his work Dialectics of Nature, he responded, Louis Pasteur's attempts in this direction are useless. For those who believe in this possibility, he will never be able to prove their impossibility by these experiments alone. Okay? You get that? The French Academy of Science wanted to put an end to the debate. Let's put it on the table right now. Spontaneous generation. Thales and Miletus came up with it at 600 BC. Is it or is it not? True. They had a contest. They had a competition. Louis Pasteur proved. No. Spontaneous generation does not happen. There's a law, biological law. It's called the law of biogenesis. Life comes from life. The beginning of life is from other life. Was that the results of that competition accepted? Well, Frederick Engels, again, Louis Pasteur's attempts in this direction are useless. For those who believe in this possibility, he will never be able to prove their impossibility by these experiments alone. 1859, 1860, 1870. That was shaking up the world. So where are we today? Well, did you know today that if we choose to live in a closed system, we still have to go with spontaneous generation? There's no other options. So, we have Richard Dawkins comments. It is often pointed out that chemists have failed in their attempts to duplicate spontaneous generation of life. The fact is, we should be worried if they could do it so easily. It appears life is only on the earth, which makes it a very improbable event. Yet it happened. Okay? It's almost like a miracle. But you have to choose, was it a miracle of nature or a miracle of God? If you want to maintain a closed system, which you need to, or you should be consistent because of the uniformitarian principle, then you have to go with spontaneous generation. As much as it's scientifically been proven to not work, you can't change just one belief, because that one belief is tied to the whole structure of the house. So in other words, Louis Pasteur's attempts to show was actually exposing the whole foundation, the whole system, the whole structure of the house that produced that belief, that basic belief. So if that's what Frederick Engels is saying, Louis Pasteur cannot, by this experiment alone, convince me that my belief system's wrong. Because if spontaneous generation is wrong and can be proven wrong, then I have to change my whole system. And I'm not going to do that. So, that's what Frederick Engels is saying. And that's what appears Richard Dawkins has commented too. And so, in other words, he is still a believer also. He's a biologist. He's a believer in spontaneous generation of life. Again, it is often pointed out that chemists have failed in their attempts to duplicate spontaneous generation of life. The fact is, we should be worried if they could do it so easily. It appears life is only on Earth, which makes it a very improbable event. Yet it happened. What do you think? What's your house look like? Where are you going with your house? What are you starting with? What's your building supplies? What are you using? Is it good? Is it good stuff? Is it going to take you where you want to go? Is it going to protect you when the rains come? That's what this series is about. Critical thinking. And giving those out there a choice to understand what's going on. And then just don't believe everything. Or don't accept and pull in whatever. Because if you pull in one concept and it's not from your house, and you accept that concept into your house in the upper levels, you're going to have to change the lower levels to accommodate that concept. That means you're going to stop believing in something. So, are you at a point that you're ready to believe or change your belief? That's basically what the questions are about. Are you content with what you believe in? Is it working? Is it true? Is it getting you reliable knowledge? We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. Again, if you want to communicate through the blog spot, that's doubleroadrover.com, or directly through email, thn.academia@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back.